Over the years, our kids have had a lot of illnesses. 6 kids means a lot of childhood sniffles and coughs. And when our kids weren't feeling well, it affected our entire home. Luckily, some clever guys in Brisbane have come up with the perfect solution: Rehydrate.
Rehydrate are delicious drinks that rehydrate up to 3 times faster than water alone, packed with essential electrolytes. Rehydrate is one of the few rehydration products that is safe for all ages. Stock up at Coles and be prepared whenever illness strikes.
Olympians said about their parents, and we have this idea that Olympians would have really pressuring, controlling, pushy parents. And some of them do, and those are the ones that we hear some stories about where things don't go well. Most of them said, my parents were just right behind me. They were not pushing me. They saw my passion, and they were there to give me what I needed to pursue it, but they stood behind me, right behind me, not in front of me, pushing me.
This is the Parenting in Perspective podcast. It's a Happy Families podcast. My name is Dr. Justin Coulson. Thank you so much for joining in. Well, we're doing things a little differently for the next little while. As you've probably noticed with our last podcast, we're in the middle of a series, or we've just commenced a series of in-depth interviews where I speak to guests, we learn, we have some fun, and we get into the nitty-gritty of what can make parenting absolutely incredible and make families flourish. Well, today's guest is Professor Wendy Grolnick, a mother, an author, and we're kind of kindred spirits in that we both work to help build happy families, and our area of research is very, very closely aligned. Professor Grolnick's book, The Psychology of Parental Control, is one of my favourites, and Wendy is based out of the Psychology Department of Clark University in Massachusetts. She's taught there for nearly 3 decades. So I began by asking her about what she loves about her university and what family life looks like for her.
It's a great little university because it is a research university, but it's small and it has a very tight-knit community. It also has a big social justice component to it. And our motto is challenge convention, change our world. So it encourages people to think outside the box, which is a really nice thing. Family-wise, I have 2 almost grown children, 2 daughters, one 27 and one 30. And actually have one of my daughters with me now during the pandemic, who's between things. And so I've had her here for a while, which has been very nice and kind of a silver lining to all of this. So yeah, I've been married for 35 years and parenting for 30. So.
And you said you've got 2 almost grown children, but then you said they're 27 and 30. So when are they actually grown?
That's a good question. They'll always be my children, and so they'll never be grown in my eyes, and I guess in a certain way. But they're forging their own paths.
Wendy, we met at a conference, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago. It was in British Columbia. We were staying at this gorgeous hotel on the water in Victoria, and I think it was about 2017. You and I had a great conversation about our mutual interest in raising happy families. And we both have a very strong interest in a theory in psychology known as self-determination theory. And it's something that I've really built much of what I share with parents around. You've done a recent study built on self-determination theory, and you found that parents who are really doing well with their families, in fact, you looked at families across the board. So you weren't sort of saying, well, these ones are doing well and these ones aren't. You just got random families to come into the lab and fill in some surveys and then go away and do some things. You got them to do a handful of things. And in particular, you found that when they did 3 things successfully, their families were happier and their children were more likely to thrive. So I wonder if you can step me through what those 3 things were and what they actually look like in practice from an applied, this is what parents need to do these 3 things.
Yeah, we've actually entered into the world of intervention, so I can tell you about how we've tried to help people move toward these 3 things. But yes, the 3 things are, one is, and I know you know a lot about this, is support for autonomy. That is helping children to feel that they are kind of like behind their actions. They're the owner of their actions. They're not being pushed and coerced, because we know that when people feel like they're being pushed and coerced, that they are less happy and they're less likely to persevere in what they're doing and be motivated and follow their passions. So when you support autonomy and help children feel this way, you can do a number of things, and we've looked at different strategies that parents can use. So one is that it all kind of starts with taking children's perspectives, thinking about where are they coming from? How are they thinking about what they're doing? And trying to get into their heads and understand their perspectives.
And that's really hard. You get into the morning rush and the morning routine, and you've got to get the children out the door, and everything's going a little bit crazy and haywire, and the children are non-compliant. They don't want to get up and go to school, and they're feeling miserable or a bit lousy. And we don't tend to take their perspective in that moment because we're also running late, and if we don't get out the door on time, we're going to miss the lights at the bottom of the street, and if we don't get through those lights at exactly 7:14, that means that we're going to be stuck until 7:20, and then we're going to get the peak hour traffic. That 6 minutes is, it makes all the difference. And so we feel a lot of pressure ourselves, and we tend to transfer that into the family environment, right? And then we take away their autonomy and start to control them.
Absolutely. And we've done some studies exactly on this. Stress makes it really hard to be autonomy supportive. But when you think about it, if you can take the perspective of the child and just give them the sense that you understand where they're coming from, they're going to be much more open to all the other things that you want them to do. So if you can just say, I understand that you'd much rather be listening to your iPad and playing on it and not getting ready, and it feels really pushy for having me do this, telling you to do it now, they'll be much more open to hearing, well, but here's what we need to do. And they hear you better when they know that you can take their perspective, understand them, and you're providing them a little bit of empathy for where they're coming from.
I say this to parents all the time. When you listen to a podcast or when you're sitting in a room with somebody like you or I and we're talking to you about that kind of thing, it all makes sense, right? We think, I'm supposed to take a breath and just connect with their emotion and say, well, you're really struggling and you just wish that this didn't have to be this way, don't you? That makes sense when we're having this conversation, but tomorrow morning when somebody's going through it, that's the last thing you want to do. It's exactly the opposite of what you want to do because you're feeling the stress and pressure and you want to get that forward momentum. You don't want to sort of put the brakes on and sit down and hold their hand and look into their eyes and say, you're having a tough time this morning, aren't you?
Right. And so there are things you can do when you're not in those very stressful moments that might make a difference for those stressful moments. So, for example, if you're having, if you're having this problem every morning, when there isn't a problem going on and when it's a quiet time, you can sit down together and talk this out. So part of autonomy support is taking kids' perspectives. Part of it is giving them choices. Part of it is problem solving together. And so you want to sit down and problem solve together and say, mornings have been really rough. I know they're hard on you. I know it stinks when you have to hear me nag you in the morning and you just got up. Let's put our heads together to figure out what we can do. What are your thoughts? So autonomy support means getting kids' input into problems that you're having and problem solving together. So yes, it's true at that moment, that might not work. But if the child comes up with some great ideas, well, you could wake me up 5 minutes earlier, or you could just knock at my door really quietly and let me know it's time. So you come up with this together there. Again, when you don't feel like somebody's yelling at you and nagging at you and coming and imposing themselves upon you, you're much more likely to understand, why you're doing it and be in this together. Problem solve together.
I love it. We've got this first thing is autonomy support, but there are 3 of these. And by the way, I think that at least for me, as I've watched how my parenting has changed over the last couple of decades, raising my 6 kids, this for me is the linchpin, like stepping away from control and stepping towards supporting autonomy or empowering our children to find the solutions that are inside themselves to do well. That seems to be it. But there's 2 other things that you highlight that families that do best also emphasize. And those 2 things are structure and involvement. And in your research, you found that this leads to the best outcomes comparatively compared to families that aren't doing this. So autonomy support, we've sort of talked about that briefly, but what is structure and involvement and how do they work?
Yeah, so structure is really connected to having kids have a sense of competence. So we put it into place to help kids feel like they know how to succeed in what you're asking them to do, or they know how to succeed in the world. And so structure is really the information you need to be successful. And what you do is you set up the environment to increase the probability that kids are going to feel competent. And you can do that by having just really clear expectations. This is what we need to be doing. This is what I expect. And guidelines for how to do that. Feedback about how you're doing. So if the job is to clean your room, you know what's expected, how often, what it means to clean your room. You know what to do, so that then children can plan their behavior and say, oh, I know how to be successful here. So that's really important. The trick is you want to connect that with autonomy support. You don't want just to impose structure on kids and say, this is how we're doing it. These are the rules. This is the schedule.
Yeah.
So we've heard a lot during the pandemic about you have to have a schedule, but kids can have input into that schedule and feel like you together, you own some of these guidelines and rules. And that's when they're going to be both feeling competent, like this is what I need to do, but also feeling, I mean, you use the word empowered, which is a good word, that you have some ownership of this and it's not just something that's coming from above.
And so the idea here, from what I've read in your research and other researchers who have played in this area, is ideally as we create a sense of structure, it's not just about the routine and the schedule. It's about the way we have small wins in our lives doing all of the things that matter. But the way that we create the structure ideally will be in an autonomy supportive way. So we'll sit down with our children and say, we have a little bit of a problem. You've probably noticed this is happening in our evenings. This is happening on our Saturday mornings, or our Sundays are just not working. We're not getting the quality family time that we want. What can we do together to make this work? And then in a supportive, non-controlling way, you develop a sort of a sense of structure. Or, we're paying all this money for piano lessons, but it seems like you just don't really get excited about practicing until 20 minutes before we have to run out the door to see the teacher, and this is not working. So it's really about having these conversations and bringing the children in so that they can solve their own problems and create those structures and supports. Is that how you're describing it?
Yes, it was really well said. Sometimes when we describe this to parents, they say, oh, well, what if they want to get up at 12 in the afternoon? That's not acceptable. It's okay for you as a parent to sort of have your guidelines within which you are working, and you're able to say, well, this idea that you came up with isn't quite going to work because blah, blah, blah. But here's some guidelines within which we can choose. Anytime between 8 and 10 is okay to walk the dog. But so what do you choose? And you give a reason for why 12 o'clock's not going to work. So it doesn't mean that you're relinquishing your role as an authority. There are some things that need to be decided within certain limits, but you can still have a sense of input and problem solving together within those guidelines.
And I found that works regardless of whether a child is 2 or 22.
Absolutely.
In fact, my wife, I'm not going to give away her age, but she's in her 40s now, and we just had a recent conversation about the potential of a renovation at home, and it was the same conversation. So what do you want to do? That sounds like it would be really great. I wish we could do that, but we need to look at the budget. And not that I'm the person that makes the decisions. It's a joint thing, but ultimately it was still a conversation where what she wanted to do with this renovation was well beyond what was within what the bank was allowing us to go and do. And so I had to say to her, how do you think that's going to go if we go to the bank and we say we want that much rather than this much? And the bank's providing the limits. But it's about that conversation. And then Kylie was able to say, oh, well, I guess I'm not going to have this accessory, and I'm not going to have this extension, and I'm not going to have this doodad. Whether we're talking to children or adults, it seems like that process is very much, let me listen. But at the end of the day, you still get to be the parent, right? You're not raising the white flag and surrendering and saying, well, whatever you want, kids, I'm just going to let you create your own structures and do it all yourself. It's very much a partnership, and it has to work for the family.
Exactly. And one other benefit that maybe Kylie doesn't need, but children need, is that the art of negotiation is a wonderful thing for children to learn. I think we've had this idea that you should be like, once you say something, that's it, and it can't change, and you don't get children's input. You have to be consistent. Well, you can have a negotiation within these guidelines, and that's a skill that kids really need. It turns out from research shows that they don't learn it from their peers. Their peers have no investment in making sure that they are good negotiators. You learn it from your parents, where they say, oh, okay, I'm going to give a little and you're going to give a little, and here we can meet somewhere in the middle. So that's an added benefit of taking this approach as well.
So we've got autonomy support, where we're really saying to the children, I want to work with you as you become volitional and control your own life, with me just providing some gentle guidance to keep you in appropriate boundaries. We've got structure, which means we're going to set things up so that our children can feel competent, feel like they're having small wins, and have a sense that they're in control of their environment. They're able to develop a sense of mastery. And the third one was involvement. You found that families that are doing really well have high levels of involvement compared to families that aren't doing so well.
Yes, absolutely. Whether it's involvement in school or it's involvement in more generally in asking about what's going on and doing things together as a family, doing family routines, all of that really makes a difference in terms of kids feeling secure and connected.
I want to go back to autonomy support for a minute. This is, I think, as I said before, this is to me the linchpin of what parents who are really getting it right really focus on. They step away from control. So when I talk to parents about autonomy support, because I have stepped out of the research thing and I don't have to use all the academic words, I tend to use words that are maybe a little bit more practical for parents to say, oh, I've just got to do A, B, and C. So I talk about it in terms of the 3 E's of effective discipline. I talk about exploring, explaining, and empowering. So when we explore, we do that first step that you said, where we try to see the world through their eyes. We say, well, you're really struggling with this. This is a really hard thing. You don't like what I've asked you to do, or you whatever it might be. And then we spend a little bit of time explaining. We say, well, it's important that you understand why this matters. You know, we have screen time limits because if you spend too much time on screens, then A, B, and C will occur. You know, we don't have enough time to be together. There's an opportunity cost where you're not doing the other things that matter so much in your life, like getting your schoolwork done or being physically fit or doing your music practice or being a part of our family. And then we empower them. We say, so if I'm getting it right, this is really important to you because of A, B, and C, but D, E, and F are the reasons that I'm struggling. So what are we going to do together? That's kind of the autonomy support process, the way I describe it. What do you think is the hardest part of actually doing this with our children? So when I was looking at your research, you talked about parents becoming stuck in unhelpful patterns that kind of lead to pressure and control and power struggles. So what are those patterns that lead to those power struggles, and how do parents get better at autonomy support?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I would just add to autonomy support, we sometimes forget that autonomy support just isn't just about the discipline and about the way we deal with problems, but it's also supporting kids' initiations, you know, for things that they're interested in and passionate about, sort of being kind of right behind them rather than in front of them, and sort of supporting what is fun and exciting for kids. My answer to your question about what gets in the way was very much based on my own experience with my kids. So I'm someone who's been studying this since well before I had children, and I would watch parents in our studies. You know, we had my first studies were with babies. We were with 12-month-olds and moms interacting with their babies, and the moms taking the kids' hands and putting them, you know, moving them and you know, saying, do it like this. And they were so invested in their kids doing well that they were some of them were very controlling. And I looked at them and said, I would never do that. But when you have your own kids, you realize this investment in them doing well is so strong. You don't want them to fail. You love them. You want them to succeed. You want them to be the best that they can be. You want them to have every opportunity. And that feeling, for me, was so visceral. It would be like I would feel it in my heart and in my stomach, and it would make you want to impose your what you know is going to be the best thing. You know, don't wear that dress. Nobody's going to like it. You know, right? Or do your homework this way, or whatever it was. You just really want them to succeed, and so. I started to do a bunch of research on just this issue that we're really invested in, not because we're bad people or we're parents get such a bad rap sometimes that they're egotistical and narcissistic. No, all parents have this feeling that they want their kids to succeed because they love them. Nature gave that to us so that we could do all this sacrificing for our kids. And we feel it as love. And so when we get into this place where we get hooked into, I know the best thing and I can't afford to have my child fail because of our own biology, but also because of the competition that's all around us. I mean, the kids are just competing all the time, and that hooks us in. And I think that's when we get really controlling and pushy and pressuring our kids to do things, when in our hearts, maybe we know that that's not the best thing to do. So people who really like this theory and would love your 3 E's find themselves being really pushy and controlling. So, and then you're in this power struggle because our natural tendency when we're controlled is to push back. We're trying to get our autonomy back. And sometimes we do the opposite. It doesn't get our autonomy back. But when we feel controlled, we push back. So then you get into these power struggles where I don't want to wear that dress, but that dress, kids are going to like you if you wear that dress. And that's going to be the best dress. And you're back and forth and you're thinking, how did I get in this place in the first place?
I'm really interested. I'd love to go through the developmental progression just briefly on this. So you talked about parents who are controlling with their infants, their 12-month or 18-month-old children and with their toddlers. And it's not because the child is necessarily doing the wrong thing, quote unquote wrong thing, but being challenging, because at 12 months old, they're not going to be particularly challenging, or 18 months. Like you said, there's well-intentioned desire for them to do well. But what did you find in terms of outcomes when you compare the children who are being controlled, even as infants and toddlers, by well-intentioned parents who just want their children to be really good? Because you're in the psychology department and you're being observed by this researcher, and you want your children to be in front of the curve, be better than all the other kids. You want them to excel, and so you dive in and start showing them how to do it. I mean, it makes sense that parents would be controlling, especially in that situation. But obviously, there were some parents who were and some who weren't. What were the outcomes for the children in terms of their motivation to participate in the activity, or their curiosity about the activity? How far did you study them? What did you find, just as a general summary of all of those various studies that you've done in that area?
Yeah, in those first studies where we actually just gave the parents a task with their children, and we said, just sit next to him while he plays with it. We weren't even pushing them to do something. And some parents, like you said, solved the problem for the child and moved their arms and were very directive. And other parents were sort of waiting, stepping back and waiting to be needed and allowing their children to explore a little bit and things like that. And then what we did was we had the children introduce the children to a kind of problem-solving toy, working with an experimenter. And mom was sitting on the side. And just said, make this work. So, and we looked at how persistent the kids were at trying to solve the problems. And we found that the ones the children of the parents who were more controlling and more solving problems for them, were less motivated when they were kind of on their own to try to solve this problem. So, that was a really important finding. And even at 12 months, then we followed those kids up at 20 months, and the kids of the more controlling parents were not only less motivated to work on independent tasks, but they were less competent at them in solving those tasks. So it did look like there are some outcomes of solving problems for kids and being really controlling.
That's fascinating. So if we were to bring that into the school years, let's say we've got our children who are now in their last 3 or 4 years of high school, and they've got parents who are controlling them and saying, you need to study harder, you need to do this, these are the grades that you need, otherwise you're not going to get into the university degree that's important to us. We've decided together, or I've decided for you, maybe you've decided yourself that you want to be a lawyer, or you want to be a vet, or you want to be a dentist, or any of these courses that are very, very, very competitive to get into. When the student is feeling controlled, or maybe it's a 10-year-old who wants to be on the representative soccer team, or maybe it's the 12-year-old who wants to win the Eisteddfod, whatever it might be. And let's argue, to keep it really balanced, that the parents are doing the best that they can. They're not being those really autocratic parents who are saying, you've got to. The children actually have some degree of desire here. The kids actually do want to get into those university courses or get onto the team or, play well in the Eisteddfod. So the children are balanced and healthy and wanting to do well, but there's still a really strong push from the parents. You haven't done your practice today. You didn't look like you tried hard in practice. I haven't seen you study for the last 3 days. You're not going to get the grade. What does that research with toddlers and infants tell us about those children when they're 15 years down the track or 10 years down the track? And is there other research specifically about those age groups in those kinds of contexts, and what does that tell us?
Yes, there is some research following up kids into high school, and there is some continuity there in terms of kids who had very controlling parents not being less autonomously motivated. And it might come out in things like choice points, where you have the choice to do something more challenging or do something easier. You might choose the easier thing. Or it might be you're less likely to want to go on in school or something like that. So it may be while you have that pressure on you, you are doing some achieving. But when you're left at the place where you're trying to figure out what it really interests you, maybe finding more that you're not sure what you're interested in. You've been sort of on this path for so long, going to the next thing. We're doing it for the next thing. We're doing it for the next thing. Do your work so that you can get into the next thing, but you're not really building upon your own interests and passions. And it's kind of interesting. When I was writing my first book, I looked at a lot of the writings of, yes.
I'm holding it up right now. The Psychology of Parental Control. It's one of my favorite parenting books.
Right.
Yeah, brilliant.
I looked at what Olympians said about their parents. And we have this idea that Olympians would have really pressuring, controlling, pushy parents. And some of them do. And those are the ones that we hear some stories about where things don't go well. But most of them said, my parents were just right behind me. They were not pushing me. They saw my passion and they were there to give me what I needed to pursue it. But they stood behind me, right behind me, not in front of me, pushing me. My daughter says that. My daughter, who was a tennis player in high school and in college, had a coach who was just very right behind her. He would say, she would call him after a match. He would say, how'd you do? And she would say, I won or I lost. And either way, and then if she said I lost, he would say, did you have fun? And she would say yes. And he would say, dynamite. And he'd say that. And I think it's quite clear that if we had pushed, if he had pushed, she never would have pursued it. It was her passion. And, you can get some achievement, but you don't get a passion unless it's in the person. And you can definitely squash a passion by putting a lot of extrinsic pushes onto it.
So there's two things that I want to quickly mention in relation to what you've just highlighted. The first is a research paper that came out, I think probably about 2 or 3 years ago now, that looked at student athletes. And these were in high school. This was not, young adults. This was teenagers. And it was actually looking at the likelihood of cheating, drug cheats particularly. And what they found was that it wasn't about the child and their attitudes, and it wasn't about the coach and their attitudes. It was about the parent and their attitudes. And the parents who were highly controlling and really pushing hard, they were the ones that had children who were much more likely to make unethical choices and unethical decisions. It's almost like that extrinsic control, specifically from the parent. I want to do so well for my parent, seemed to be some sort of a predictor that led to less positive choices on the part of the athlete to excel, to do well. Whereas when the parents were less pushy and said, we're here to support you, not to control you, the children tended to make better decisions. That's the first point. The second one was just on your daughter and her tennis experience. Because we have 6 children and because of my background, I get to experiment a lot with my children, right? And everything I get wrong with the first few, I get to try to get right with the last ones. We decided we'd just keep having kids until we started to get it right.
That's great.
And when it comes to music, we've always loved music and wanted our children to have an appreciation and an ability when it comes to music. What we found with our first 2 children was we would tell them to go and practice the piano or go and practice the guitar or go and practice their singing or practice whatever for 30 minutes. Now off you go and do your practice. You've got 30 minutes. Go and get it done. We found that they watched the clock for 30 minutes.
Right.
We found that the quality of their practice was poor. And both of those first two children dropped out of music. They didn't appreciate it. They didn't like it. They didn't have the discipline. They didn't want it. And we thought that there was something faulty about their character. We thought, well, they're just faulty children. We clearly, it wasn't us. It was the children for sure. But we changed our approach with children 3 and 4 and so on. And our approach with our subsequent children has been, gee, I love hearing you play that guitar. Oh, when you sing, the whole house feels different. It's been a while since I've heard you on the piano. How are you going with that song? And those gentle, supportive prompts lead the children back to their instruments, and they don't look at the clock. They'll sit down and play for as long as they feel inclined to play. And sometimes it will only be 3 or 4 minutes, but sometimes it'll be an hour or an hour and a half. And their music has become a source of joy because there's autonomy support rather than control.
That's a wonderful, wonderful story. Wonderful story. So many people have the stories of the piano lessons that went awry. And so it's really good to hear that story.
Yeah, it's the opposite of Tiger Mum. I remember hearing about the Tiger Mum by Amy Chow and how, she sat on the seat and made her daughter cry and cry and cry for hours, but she wasn't getting up until she finished. And yes, her daughter became, the equivalent of a concert pianist or whatever, but there was no joy in it. And she wanted to stop. And I don't want my kids to feel like that. I want them to love what they do. Now, I asked you what sort of leads to these power struggles, and we've talked about that at length. And I asked also, how can parents get out of those power struggles? It seems like we need to try to be autonomy supportive by having conversations out of the moment and problem solving together.
Sure, yeah. And I think when a little of it is self-reflective, for me, it feels visceral. When you feel that sense that I'm feeling really pressured to push. I'm feeling, I then to be a little self-reflective and say, where is that coming from? Why am I feeling that way? What are really the risks of allowing my child to not play the piano today or this week? Or what are the risks of that? Where is that coming from? And sort of be interested in it and realize it's just a feeling. It's a feeling. It's an uncomfortable feeling sometimes, but you don't have to necessarily act on it. And you can sort of take a step back and say, what are the consequences if I allow this or I ask the opinion? And of course, that's easier said than done when you're in a stress moment. But sometimes if you're, you can think about what really are the consequences here, and how can I make a better decision or the best decision in terms of the situation. And I think part of it also lies for me in having faith in this and a theory of why people do what they do. And in this case, what we do when our intervention is sort of give people a theory so that they can have some faith in it. If you really believe that people will follow their passions, if they are supported in autonomously, then you'll be able to say, okay, the guitar wasn't for you. And you'll find something else. But you have to have that faith that people will find their interests if you allow that to happen. And people really will do better if they're supported in their autonomy. Because I think what happens sometimes is you say, oh God, if I don't make her take that AP course, and if I don't make her study right now, it's going to be bad for her. But you have to have faith that if I solve this problem for her, if I control exactly what she's doing, that it won't be such a good thing in the long term, because in the short term, it might feel like it is. And so having faith in a theory of human nature and is for me really important, because you get tested as a parent all the time.
I love what you said there, Wendy, particularly this idea that controlling parenting actually comes from fear. It's almost like we're fearful that things are not going to be okay. We're fearful that everything's going to go wrong, and therefore we step in with control because we feel like it's our duty to fix it and we have the power to do so. And what I'm hearing you say really clearly is if we step back and provide the right environment for our children where they feel safe. We're not raising the white flag and saying, oh, well, fine, if you don't want to swim, if you don't want to play tennis, if you don't want to learn how to play the musical instrument, we're just not going to do anything for you anymore. And you're going to end up in your room and you're going to be staring at a screen for the rest of your life. That's not going to work out very well. That's kind of that fear paradigm. But instead to look at our children and say, well, I guess that didn't work out. You let us know what you think might work out and we'll support you in that instead. And then step back with the trust that in the right environment, they actually will.
Exactly. Trust is a really good word. Trust in your kids and also trust in the developmental process. Yeah.
If you created a simple list of outcomes that we see in children who have parents who are autonomy supportive and providing structure and building involvement, what would the evidence point to? Just that, what does the science say happens when we do this stuff consistently? How do our kids turn out?
Right. So kids whose parents are more autonomy supportive will be more self-regulating in their behavior, whether it's in school, they'll be more likely to be more spontaneously engaging and less likely to have to be pushed. They're going to be more self-regulating. People find that autonomy support is associated with better self-esteem. Because when people are solving problems for you all the time, you're thinking, well, I must be not very good at this. So building self-esteem, being more active in their coping. So when they have setbacks, when parents are more autonomy supportive, the kids will be more actively trying to solve the problems and engaging them rather than just throwing the bad exam into the garbage can and never looking at it again.
So it's kind of like they're becoming more resilient. It's like it's a resilience booster. It's a growth strategy.
Exactly. And also feeling more in control of their successes and failures, that they can have an impact. And finally, also feeling more secure in their attachment. So when parents are autonomous, sort of kids feel more like they that they can count on their parents to be there when they need them, and feel more secure. And that enables you to then explore your world a little bit more with this backdrop of support.
I love that. When I decided to step out of university, I'd been working as a lecturer. I'd gotten my postgraduate qualifications with my doctorate. I'd been working as a researcher and as a lecturer. And I remember, by this point, I'm in my mid-30s, right? But I remember being so nervous as I made this decision that I wanted to step away from that and start talking to parents on a full-time basis and write books and that kind of thing. And I remember talking with my wife, and I even got in touch with my parents, and none of the three people that I spoke to said anything negative or necessarily positive. What they each did instead was they supported my autonomy, and they gave me the confidence to back myself, knowing that I had their support. Okay, well, if that's what you feel good about, we support you, we encourage you, and that's what actually gave me the courage to step out and do it. I think if my parents had been controlling, or if my wife had said, "What are you doing? That's ridiculous," it probably would have had a profound impact on the outcome in both the short term and the long term. I know that I'm making this about me now. There's a bit of therapy going on, but I love the way this works. So Wendy, you mentioned that at Clark University, part of the motto is that you challenge convention. And I feel as though a lot of what we've talked about today really does challenge the common convention of what the standard parenting programs that are out there about. There's so much control in so many of the big parenting programs, including the global ones. So when you think about the research that you've done over the last 30 plus years into families, what's the most powerful thing that you've learned, and how has it challenged convention and helped you to be a better Wendy Grolnick?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in terms of the work with parents, I'm very sensitive to the negative stereotypes and raps about parents. And my experience working with parents is that they all want the best for their kids. And they're doing the things they do with that in mind. And so it's really important to not be judging of how parents are acting, and understanding that behind that is wanting the best for their kids. And in all the situations that we have, we can find that and really be very supportive and positive ourselves.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. Well, to conclude our conversation, Wendy, and it's been so wonderful talking to you, I ask 5 rapid fire questions and I'm excited to hear your answers. So if we asked your 2 children their favorite thing to do with you, or given that they're in their late 20s now, their favorite memories of you because they're older, what would they say? Favorite thing to do with mom and dad?
It's funny. The other day, my older daughter, who's 30 now, said to me, when we were little, you let us do whatever we wanted. And I don't think I let them do whatever they wanted, but she gave this example of something, it's a funny thing that my younger daughter wanted to do. She wanted to, every week she wanted to give an award to one of my older daughter's friend's parents as the nicest parent of the week or something. And I actually, and she got some flowers and she wanted, we went to the house, we gave the flowers, and she said, why did you let her do that? That was very strange. And I said, she was so passionate about it. It was out of compassion. Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I let her do that? So they do have this sense that I followed them, and sometimes, and that's a really nice thing. And allowed them to follow their sometimes silly or funny interests and kooky interests. So they probably say that.
So what's been your trickiest parenting moment?
It's tricky to be a motivation researcher on parenting with children, because they actually, at a certain point, they read my book and they would say things like, they would use my language and they would say, Mom, you're being controlling. You're not practicing what you preach. And so sometimes when we were dealing with, tricky things in teenagerhood about curfew and things like that, they would use the language against me. So I'd say, well, I'm just trying to provide structure. And I think just trying to stay true to what I believe, but tested all the time with those moments where I got hooked into wanting to make sure everything turned out okay, and couldn't do that all the time.
I have that happen to me all the time. First of all, I feel like I'm supposed to be the perfect parent and I get it wrong. But secondly, my children many times as teenagers particularly, but even some of the younger ones have said, Dad, you're supposed to be a parenting expert.
Yeah.
And they throw it back at me. I'm like, oh my goodness, you got me. Okay,
Right.
question.
A lot of pressure.
Oh, so much pressure. Question number 3. If you could spend an hour with your kids at any age at all, let's say tomorrow afternoon at 3:00, they're going to walk into your living room and they're going to be that magical age, what age would you pick and why?
I would pick how they are exactly now. For me, every stage, every time they grow, I'm just wowed by who they are as and so and the way in which we can interact now as friends and colleagues and equals and a parent-child. But so right now, I think would be my pick. I just love interacting with them as adults.
Great. So question number 4 of the 5, no matter how good life has been and how glad you are to be in the moment right now, what are you most looking forward to as a mum?
Oh, gosh. To be honest, grandkids, of course. It's going to be a while, but I'm trying not to say anything because that's not.
No, you don't want to. No pressure, no control. Just let them, make up their mind when they're ready.
Or just seeing them settled in whatever interests them and happy, and so just seeing that move along.
Beautiful. And the last question, which is my favorite: if you could go back to Wendy Grolnick as a young mum with no experience at this parenting thing at all, what one piece of advice would you give yourself? And how did you learn how valuable that was?
It's actually a piece of advice that I give parents, and I try not to give too much advice, but when we work with them, is to see every setback that your child has as an opportunity for them to learn something. And so I wish I had known that at the time. For this is just an example. There was one year that my daughter, at the school that my older daughter was at, the principal would say, you can't ask for a particular teacher. That was a rule. But apparently everybody did, and I just didn't realize it. So we always got the new teacher. So one year, I'm a rule follower that way. So one year she got this teacher that was just really not knowledgeable. It was a friend of a friend or something like that. She only lasted a year, but she really set the kids back in the sense that she really didn't know what they had learned. Last year they were learning old things. And at the time I was thinking, I should really do something and change her class. And, this is terrible and she's going to be behind. Well, that year, because all the other teachers were producing plays in their classrooms and this teacher didn't, my older daughter actually asked the teacher, can I write a play and that the school can put on? And she put on this play. She wrote the play. She put on the play in her class. She developed a philanthropic project that year. And so growth happens in the strangest places. And so if I engineered that to get her out of it, that never would have happened. And so the opportunities of helping your kids deal with whatever is in front of them in an autonomy supportive way and learn those skills. And you just never know what's going to be the growth opportunity. So when parents come in and say, this is happening and I don't think it's good, and this is a great opportunity for you to teach your child that you can get through this. I don't think I knew that. But if I'd known that, I probably wouldn't have believed it. So, but I wish I had, and I do try to convey that to parents, that it's all just a learning opportunity. Thank goodness this bad thing happened or this challenge happened, because your child's still home and they're not in college yet, where they're not going to have you there to help them through it.
Wendy, so very grateful for you being so generous with your time and with your expertise today. It's beautiful. It's great to have the conversation. So I'm tremendously thankful. It's been...
Oh, I hope it was useful.
I hope that you've gotten some wonderful insight into Wendy Grolnick as a result of this Parenting in Perspective podcast. Wendy's a wonderful communicator and has some brilliant thoughts around how we can support and encourage our kids without pressure and coercion. Her books are well worth looking up, and I think they'd be a great resource for any parent's library. Before I tell you about my next interview, can I ask you to jump into wherever you get your podcasts, but preferably Apple Podcasts, and leave a review. Just a 5-star review will be fine. If you want to leave a 1-star review, just keep that to yourself. We don't need those ones. But any 5-star reviews are welcome. Jump into Apple Podcasts. The more you tell people how much you love the podcast, the more people will discover it and get to participate in great conversations like we've just had. So please feel free to dive in. Apple Podcasts, leave a rating and a review, and let people know how you're enjoying the podcasts and why. I hope you'll join me next time. Episode 3 of the Parenting in Perspective podcast is with Jessica Rowe.
I was someone who I'd grown up with a mum who has a mental illness, so I thought I understood mental illness. Mum and I had been very public about her mental illness and had done advocacy work for Beyond Blue. My mum has bipolar. So my message up until that point publicly had been, there should be no shame in mental illness. We need to talk about it like any other physical illness.
You've probably heard of Jessica Rowe. She's all over our TVs. She's been in the media for a long, long time, and she's been a wonderful friend and supporter of the work that I do to help build happier families. I'll be talking with Jess about her IVF journey, the importance of our own story and mental health. It's a really important conversation, and I can't wait to share it with you. That's Jessica Rowe on the next Parenting in Perspective podcast, a Happy Families podcast. If you'd like more information on how to access more premium content, visit happyfamilies.com.au and click on memberships.